Imagine you're trapped at the end of a narrow tunnel in a cave. You're pinned, unable to push your way out, and there's no way for you to go forward to turn around. You call for help, and although your brother finds you quickly, he's unable to pull you free. He leaves to go get help, and while you wait, your head starts feeling like it's going to explode. It's hot, and there's a lot of pressure on your eyes and on the top of your head. It's getting harder to breathe. The cave walls are pressed up against you, making it impossible to get a full breath of air, and your lungs start feeling like they're filling up with fluid. Your legs start to go numb and send jolts of pain when they are touched. On November 24th, 2009, this is what happened to John Jones in the Nutty Putty Cave. I'm Amanda Frazee, and this is SOSAD, Stories of Survival and Death, a series where I talk about people in horrific situations, their lives, and how they either survived or died in that situation. If these types of stories interest you, please like and subscribe, and let's get into it. John Edward Jones was born January 21st, 1983 in Sandy, Utah, to Leon and Sherry Jones. He grew up in St. George, Utah. He grew up in the LDS faith and was a devout member his whole life. He lived his life by the gospel, and he had a strong love for it and the people, and he loved missionary work. He was one of 7 children. He had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and from what I could gather, he was really close to his family. And although I'm not quite sure where he was in the placement of his family, I feel like he was one of the younger ones because he had 16 nieces and nephews at the time of this story. Although I do know he had one younger sibling, Josh, who was about 3 years younger. He loved children and really enjoyed playing with his nieces and nephews. His family was really adventurous and they loved exploring. And cave exploring or spelunking was one of their favorite family activities. So he had experience with being in tight places and he wasn't uncomfortable in them. He was described as a remarkable person who tried to experience everything good in life. He attended Dixie High School, and during those years he became an Eagle Scout and he was his senior class president. So he was a pretty well-liked guy, pretty popular. After graduating in 2001, he served a 2-year mission for his church, and he served in Quito, Ecuador. When he returned, he attended BYU in Provo, Utah, and that's where he met Emily Peterson. They met at a crosswalk where he asked if he knew her, and Emily has said that it sounded like a line, but he defended himself saying that he swore that he saw her in one of his classes. And this seemed to work for her because not soon after that they were dating. And their relationship progressed and they became really close. But Emily also wanted to serve a mission, and that would take her away for, 18 months. And so she wasn't really thinking about marriage or anything really that serious. And John was very supportive of this, and he wanted this for her. But a week after she got her call to serve in Madagascar, John felt like he couldn't wait anymore. And so he took her to the top of a building in Salt Lake City. There were rose petals on the ground. He had a dinner made, and he played a song for her and proposed. I don't think she outright rejected him, but she didn't say yes either. And she just, I think this threw a wrench in her plans. And she didn't really know what to think or say. So she took her time, and after 2.5 months, she accepted his proposal, and then 2 months later, they were married. I don't know the specific date, but it was sometime in 2006. Not long after they married, Emily became pregnant, and after they both graduated from BYU, they moved back east so John could attend medical school to become a pediatric cardiologist, and so that they could be closer to Emily's family in Salem. I'm guessing their daughter was born sometime in October of 2008, so she would have been born fairly soon after they moved. In late 2009, John started his second semester of medical school, and just before a trip to visit his family for Thanksgiving, they found out that they were pregnant again. And John attended the first sonogram, and then they were off to Utah to deliver the good news to his family. So the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, John, his younger brother Josh, and 9 other friends and family decided that they were going to go explore the Nutty Putty Caves. They'd never been to this cave before, but this was a great opportunity for them to reconnect and relive childhood memories and have a little bit of fun before all the holiday events. Emily would have gone too, but she decided to stay behind to put their 13-month-old daughter Lizzie to bed. So a bit about the Nutty Putty Cave. It's a hydrothermal cave system located west of Westlake, Utah, renowned for its narrow passageways. It was first explored in 1960 by Dale Green, who named the cave after the putty-like texture of the clay that lined most of the walls of the cave. It contains 1,400 feet of chutes and tunnels that are accessed by a narrow surface hole referred to as the blowhole. Before this incident, there had been 4 other rescues done in this cave for people who had gotten stuck. On July 29th, 1999, 2 17-year-olds, Chris Hale and Chris Merrow, got stuck in a section called the birth canal, and they were stuck for about 12 hours before they were gently pulled out and went home with minor scrapes and bruises. On March 17th, 2001, 2 13-year-olds also got trapped in the birth canal for about 4 hours, and they went home and they were tired and exhausted, but otherwise fine. On August 21st, 2004, 16-year-old Brock Clark got stuck upside down for 10 hours, and he was rescued and hospitalized in stable condition. And then about 2 weeks later, on September 4th, 2004, David Crowther, who was 23 at the time, got stuck for about 8 hours, and they had to chisel him out of a section, but he was able to return home with no serious injuries or hospitalization. In 2006, an effort was put forth to study and severely limit the amount of people who were visiting this cave. It was estimated that nearly 5,000 people were visiting this cave a year, and many of them weren't using the proper safety equipment or precautions, and they were arriving late at night. The cave's popularity had caused excess smoothing of the rock inside the cave, and it was predicted that a fatality would occur in one of the more prominent rooms, called the Big Slide, if something wasn't done about it. So on May 24th, 2006, a gate was installed and the cave was temporarily closed. In early 2009, proper management was established and an application process was developed to ensure that safety precautions were being met. And then on May 18th, 2009, the cave was reopened to the public. So John and his companions entered the cave at around 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 24th, 2009. And after going through the Big Slide, he and his brother and a few other friends decided that that wasn't challenging enough and they wanted to explore more. So they started going off into different tunnels and chutes looking for the entrance to the birth canal, which was a more challenging part of this cave. In their search, they took different pathways, and John picked a waist-high hole to go down into, and he went headfirst down into this hole. And as he got further and further into it, it kept getting narrower and narrower. As he's moving further into this hole, he probably realized that this wasn't the entrance to the birth canal, but he couldn't get his way back out going backwards. So he looks ahead and he sees this ledge and he thinks, okay, if I go over this ledge, it probably opens up and I'll be able to turn around and come back out. So he makes his way to this ledge, and as he goes over it, he has to exhale all of his air to get over. And as he does, he falls forward. And when his chest re-expands, he's pinned. And when he falls, his headlamp falls off of his head And he can see that this passageway doesn't open up. It ends. And there's no way for him to turn around. So now he's upside down over this ledge that was just narrow enough for him to even get through. But now that his chest is expanded, him going back that way was impossible. He couldn't push his ribs back through. So now John was stuck at pretty much a 90-degree angle, pretty much up and down. And he had one arm pinned underneath him and the other one above him, but he couldn't push his way back out. So he started yelling for help, and pretty soon his brother hears him. At first, Josh thought it was just going to be a funny family story to tell in the future, because once before their father had been trapped and he got out, and now they just talked about it at all these family events. They'd bring it up and tease him about it. So Josh just thought this was going to be something that was like that. So Josh inches his way into the hole, and as he's getting deeper in, he realizes that this is serious. And when he finally gets to John, all he sees of John is his calves and his feet. He tries pulling on him. He gets him to move a little bit, but as soon as he lets go, John just falls right back into this fissure. So they said a prayer together where Josh prayed that the Lord would help guide them through it, and John prayed to be saved for his family. And then Josh exited the hole and went back to the surface to call for help. And another friend came in to keep John company. So John got stuck somewhere around 9 p.m. and search and rescue didn't get there until around 12:30 a.m. So about 3.5 hours later. And first of the rescuers to arrive to John was Susie Matola. She was smaller build, and so it was easier for her to navigate the narrow, confining spaces of this cave. John says, "Hi, Susie, thanks for coming, but I really, really want to get out." And Susie replied that she'd get him out lickety-split and that they would go for pancakes afterwards. Now, the situation was very dire. He was in an uncharted area of the cave that had been described as one of the most difficult places to get to, and that only the smallest and most nimble of contortionists could navigate this area. Much like how I explained at the beginning, he was upside down. And even though he was found fairly quickly after he got trapped, he had all of these things going on physiologically that really put a time crunch on them. John was about 6 feet tall and weighed about 200 pounds. So he wasn't a small guy, and this was gonna be a very difficult job. And I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it's believed that this was the same area that Brock Clark got stuck in. He was the 16-year-old that was stuck upside down for 10 hours before they removed him. But Brock was smaller. He was, at the time when he got stuck, he was 5'7" and weighed 140 pounds. So there was a big weight and size difference between them. He was in a hole that was about 10 inches by 18 inches. And that's a very confining space. And like I said, he was upside down. The human body isn't meant to be upside down for long periods of time. In our feet, we have vessels that push blood back to our hearts, but we don't have those same structures in our heads. And so there's no way to push the blood back to our hearts because gravity does that for us. And so when we're upside down, gravity's working against us. So blood would have started pooling in his brain very quickly. And if you've ever, laid upside down or been upside down for a long period of time, you know the pressure that you start feeling in your head. Little is known about the effects of being upside down for too long or, a time frame. But Dr. Doug Murdoch, a trauma physician to the scene, estimated that he probably had between 8 and 10 hours left before his body was just gonna shut down. He knew that John's circulation would be slowing, blood would be pooling, and there would be toxins starting to build up in his blood, and the shock of which would likely kill him. So even if they were able to get him out, it was going to be a long process before they could even get him to the hospital. And so they had medications ready to dispense as soon as they pulled him free. Rescue workers set up a base camp at the surface, and there were about 137 people involved in this rescue, and only 6 of them were small enough to get to where John was. They went through several strategies on how to free him. When Susie got down there, the first thing she did is she tied a rope around his ankles. But they found that the friction on the rope was too great and they didn't have enough leverage in order to pull him out that way. The temperature of the cave was around 68 degrees, so it wasn't a very uncomfortable temperature to be in. So they tried cutting away some of his clothes, seeing if that would kind of loosen up and give them a little bit more room. They even brought several gallons of vegetable oil to see if that would help loosen him. And they thought about using explosives, but it was determined that neither of those options were going to work. They also tried to chisel away some of the rock, but that was going to take too long. It took them a half an hour just to get 6 inches of rock chiseled away. And he was in a tunnel that was 135 feet long, so that would take a long time. The only real option that they had was to pull him out with the rope. But the geometry of the cave was in such a way that when they pulled, they would likely break his legs. But this was their only option, so this is what they had to do. They started using climbing cams and drilling them into the wall to act like a pulley system that would put less friction on the ropes and make it easier for them to pull. And after they'd install one, they'd pull again, and if the friction was too great, they would add another cam. This took a lot of time, and each piece of gear took about an hour for them to get from the surface to where John was. And workers would keep someone there in the tunnel with him to keep him company while they were doing this construction. And that next morning, Emily arrived at the base camp with her daughter Lizzie and John's parents because she couldn't wait at home any longer. John connected with many of the workers on religion. Most of them, this was Utah, and so most of them shared the same faith, and so he would talk about religion with them, and they would sing hymns and pray. And during this time, his breathing was becoming more labored, and they could hear the fluid was building up in his lungs, in his voice. At 9 a.m., a worker named Ryan Schultz went in to be with John while they were continuing the construction of this pulley system. At some point during this, John started to show signs of delirium. He told Ryan that he didn't want to be on his head anymore. And Ryan said, "Well, why are you on your head?" And John fires back, "Well, why did you guys put me here?" He began alternating between calm, coherent conversation and thrashing about in sheer panic. So Ryan connected with John on their shared faith, and Ryan found a way to drip Gatorade through a tube down to John's mouth so he could have a little bit of something to drink. Because at this point, it had been hours that he was trapped. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink, just stuck there. And John apologized for being so fat. Ryan found the best way to keep John focused was to keep him talking about his young family. And they found out that the baby was actually due on Ryan's birthday. A telecom was brought down to John, and he was able to talk briefly with Emily. They expressed their love for each other, and Emily told John to keep fighting, and John said to tell Lizzie that he loved her and that he'd be out to the surface to be with them soon. At about 4 p.m. on the 25th, so 19 hours after John initially got stuck, the pulley system was completed. There were 15 tandem pulleys, and then closest to John, the rope went through a natural arc just above the crack he was in. Ryan prepped John to get him to push, and they started to pull. John began inching up, but when his feet hit the surface, he screamed in pain, and Ryan told them to stop and just let him back down. During the third attempt, Ryan was actually able to see John's face for the first time. And he said even though his eyes were red from crying, he wasn't bleeding and he looked to be okay. And then on the fourth attempt, just when it was starting to look like this was going to work, the arc where the rope was looped through shattered. The rope broke and a carabiner came flying into Ryan's face. It broke his jaw and sliced his tongue open. And John slid right back into the crack where he had been. And he did his best to try to keep John calm, but he said, "I've been hurt, I'm bleeding, and I need to go." So Ryan got out, and while he was being treated by paramedics, he convinced his dad, Dave, Ryan's dad, Dave, to go in and be with John. So Dave comes in by John, and John says, "I'm gonna die right here. I'm not getting out of here, am I?" And then he started asking about Ryan repeatedly, saying, "Is he okay? I think he's really hurt bad." After this, John fell silent and his breathing slowed. And while Dave waited for a drill to make a new pulley hole, he tried to tie a rope around John's waist, and he asked John to suck in, but John didn't respond or move at all. And then Dave got stuck for a bit, and it took him about 15 minutes to get out of the hole to get the drill because only one person could fit in the hole at a time. By the time he got back to John, he knew that John was dying right then. And he fought off his feelings of depression and despair, and he just worked through it and got the pulley in. And then when he got back out, he told the lead commander, Lieutenant Tom Hodgson, that there was no way anyone was going to get back in there before John was gone. But Hodgson was focused on a promise that he had made to John's family that they would get him out. And so he sent another rescuer named Brandon Kowalis down with the telecom system so that Emily could talk to John and hopefully encourage him, get him to respond. So when Brandon gets the telecom down to him, Emily says, "I know you've been pushing so hard for so long. Why don't you rest for a minute and take a break, and then you can push again?" But John still didn't respond. So a paramedic went in, and at 11:56 p.m. on November 25th, 2009, John was pronounced dead. He had been there for about 27 hours. Cause of death was thought to be either suffocation, bleeding in the brain, or most likely cardiac arrest. Emily didn't understand how they could pronounce him dead because they hadn't been feeling a pulse in his legs for hours. But she reluctantly left after they promised that they would recover his body. However, a few hours later, Lieutenant Hodgson had to call the family and let them know that recovery wouldn't be possible. As hard as it was to get him out while he was alive, it was now going to be impossible to get him out now that he couldn't help. Removing him was going to be even more dangerous to the workers, and so the family decided not to risk any more lives and that this was going to be John's final resting place. So at 100 feet below the surface and 400 feet from the entrance, John Jones' body is still in the Nutty Putty Cave. Police were stationed 24/7 at the site to keep curious people away. On November 28th, they decided to seal off the whole cave instead of just the section he was in because they didn't feel it was appropriate to have recreational activities going on around somebody's grave. So explosives were used around the area he was located, and then 30 feet of concrete was poured at the entrance, and a grave marker was placed just outside the entrance. So you can still go to Nutty Putty Cave. You can't go in. You can go there to visit his grave. Ryan recovered well enough. He had stitches in his tongue and some swelling, and for Thanksgiving he ended up having a shake through a straw. And he attended John's memorial service along with many of the other rescuers, and he said it was a very hard experience for him to talk about, and that he felt that if John had survived, they would have been really close friends. Due to work, Susie wasn't able to attend the debrief of the rescue attempt, where the family told them that they didn't place any blame on them for not being able to get him out. And they thanked them for trying and for treating him like family. And so Josh later called Susie to express this to her personally. And Susie was going through a lot of depression over that. You know, she wasn't able to save this man, and it just felt like a failure. And Josh and Susie connected and were able to create a friendship over this. Josh had a girlfriend, but whenever he went on kayaking adventures or did anything outdoors, he always made sure to invite Susie to go along with him and his group of friends that were doing these activities. As for Emily thought that she was going to be single for the rest of her life. Part of the LDS beliefs is that you're married forever. So to her, John wasn't gone. He was just on the other side waiting for her to join him. She would make herself busy with chore lists, and there was so much stuff in the aftermath of what she had to do that she stayed busy for a while. But 5 o'clock would come, and that was the time when John would get home, and it would just be a devastating time for her. She missed him, but she mostly missed his conversation and his company. But she's had some experiences where she says that she knows that he's still there. And this just reaffirms her belief that she will see him again. And in June of 2010, Emily gave birth to their son, and she named him John. When John was around 1 year old, Emily started to notice that he would cling on to men, and she just knew that he needed a father figure. But she wasn't ready to get back out there. And then one day her brother introduced her to his college roommate, who he thought would be a perfect fit for her. His name was Donovan Sanchez, and things worked out well with him. And so when Donovan proposed, Emily called John's parents to make sure that they would be okay with that, because she still remained really close to them. At their wedding in 2012, Emily's father performed the ceremony, and John's father, Leon, walked her down the aisle. And Donovan has been extremely supportive of keeping John and his family still a part of their lives. They still talk about him. They still include his memory in things to do with his children and in their lives. In 2016, with Emily's permission, a filmmaker named Isaac Kalasima released a movie about the incident titled The Last Descent. And I watched the movie. It's on Amazon Prime, or it was when I watched it. And I think they did a really great job of transitioning this story into a story of love and a story of hope. Of course, they dramatize it, like they changed a couple things, changed the story a little bit. In the movie version, Emily tells John she's pregnant while he's trapped in the cave. And in real life, he knew beforehand, but you know, movies. And in the movie, there's a point where John is talking to Ryan's character, who is called Aaron. I'm gonna cry. And he says, "Promise me that you will tell Emily that I will be there for our baby's birth no matter what." I don't know. It got to me. Anyway, it's a good movie, and so I recommend you guys watch that. But this was a story that has been in my mind for years. I always kind of keep thinking about it and just going over it again in my head, and just how tragic this was. This young father, he's in medical school, he gets stuck. He has help right there. People are right there trying to help him, and they just couldn't in time. He was a victim of the circumstance. He was a victim of his positioning. I mean, had he been upright, it would probably be a whole different outcome to this story. Or had he not gone in that hole, it would have just been a fun family experience. And I don't know. It's a really sad story. So I just wanted to talk about it. And this was a place that I can do this. And I hope you guys enjoy this kind of content too. I don't know if enjoy is the right word. Maybe if you're entertained. No, I don't know. There's not a good word for this. If you're intrigued by these kinds of stories like I am, please again like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.